There's something really frustrating about Far Cry 6, and it starts the moment you step into Yara. Ubisoft clearly wants you to think this place matters. They've crafted this lush, pseudo-Cuban island with all the visual cues of a country under siege. Military propaganda plastered on buildings, checkpoints everywhere, rebels hiding in the hills. But the more time you spend in this world, the more you realize it's all smoke and mirrors. The world is beautiful, yes, but it's not alive. And that's a recurring theme throughout the game. It wants to be about something, but it never actually is. Yara is supposed to be in the middle of a full-blown revolution. People are being arrested, executed, and manipulated by a dictator who uses forced labor to manufacture a miracle cure. That premise is loaded with potential. But you wouldn't know any of that by just playing the game. NPCs barely react to you. Civilians don't protest. The regime doesn't really feel threatening. You could shoot a rocket launcher in the street, and 10 seconds later, everyone goes back to selling fruit like nothing happened. It's weird. It's disconnected. And it kills any sense of immersion the game tries to build. This is the core issue. Ubisoft is still clinging to a formula that's now over a decade old. Climb towers, clear bases, loot gear, rinse and repeat. It worked in Far Cry 3 because it was fresh, it had an edge, but in Far Cry 6, it feels like they slapped a new skin on the same old systems and hoped the revolution theme would carry the rest. Spoiler, it doesn't. And I get it, open world fatigue is real. But what's especially frustrating here is that Far Cry 6 pretends to be more evolved. It says it's doing something different. There's this big push for cinematic storytelling, and they bring in someone like Giancarlo Esposito to play the dictator, Antón Castillo. But when you dig even a little below the surface, the cracks are obvious. The open world doesn't respond to your actions. Nothing changes as you push through enemy territory. The people you're supposedly fighting for? They don't care. There's no sense of escalation, no rising tension. You could be halfway through overthrowing the regime, and the vibe on the streets stays exactly the same. Yara feels less like a country in crisis, and more like a theme park with a guerrilla revolution ride. And that's what makes Far Cry 6 so disappointing. It's a game that talks about revolution, but refuses to actually engage with the concept. It's style over substance. All spectacle, no soul. It wants to feel important, but it never earns it. Antón Castillo is, on paper, one of the most promising villains Far Cry has ever introduced. He is the dictator of Yara, a fictional island modeled after Cuba, and is portrayed by the immensely talented Giancarlo Esposito, best known for his roles in Breaking Bad and The Mandalorian. Ubisoft leveraged his casting in every trailer, interview, and marketing beat, positioning Antón as the centerpiece of Far Cry 6's narrative experience. But once you actually play the game, it becomes painfully clear that Castillo is not the character you were promised. Instead of being an omnipresent force, constantly looming over your every move, he is relegated to scattered cutscenes and distant monologues. He feels disconnected from the events unfolding on the ground, detached from the rebellion you're supposed to be leading. This dissonance isn't just a narrative flaw, it's a structural failure of storytelling in interactive media. Ubisoft had the opportunity to deliver a villain that shaped the world around you, reacted to your decisions, and became a personal adversary in real time. Instead, they gave us a background actor who never leaves the stage. The illusion of menace is there, sure. He's on posters, heard over radios, tossed feared by NPCs, but illusion isn't enough. In a game about revolution, you need a tyrant whose presence is inescapable. Antón Castillo, tragically, is anything but. In previous Far Cry games, the villains were a constant part of your journey. Vaz from Far Cry 3 would show up when you least expected, creating tension and fear. Paganman in Far Cry 4 always felt close, like he was watching your every move. Even Joseph Seed in Far Cry 5, with all his flaws, was always in your mind, through his speeches, his followers, and how he affected the world around you. But in Far Cry 6, Antón Castillo feels far away. You almost never see him in the actual game. He appears only in cutscenes. And even then, most of those scenes show him talking to his son Diego, not reacting to what you're doing as the player. He doesn't chase you, doesn't try to stop you, and never really fights back. There are no surprise moments where you feel like he's hunting you down. It's as if he's not really part of your story. That's a big problem, especially in a game about leading a revolution. You're supposed to be going against a powerful dictator, but he never shows that power in the gameplay. He doesn't feel like a threat. Ubisoft used Giancarlo Esposito, a great actor known for playing strong and scary characters, but they didn't give him much to do. Instead of being a real villain you have to face, he just gives speeches from his palace. You don't feel like you're fighting him, you're just clearing missions. Because he never interacts with you directly, it's hard to feel anything about him. That makes the story feel empty. A great villain should push back and make things harder for you. Castillo doesn't. He's just there on the sidelines, and that hurts the whole experience. One of the biggest missed opportunities in Far Cry 6 is the relationship between Antón Castillo and his son, Diego. From the very beginning, the game shows us that Diego is stuck between two worlds. He's a good kid being raised by a brutal dictator. This could have been a very emotional and powerful part of the story. We could have watched Diego slowly question his father or struggle with what kind of person he wants to be. But the game barely develops this idea. Diego shows up in a few scenes, asks a couple of questions, and then disappears again. Nothing really changes because of him, and we never see him take a strong stand. It's all too soft and too quick. The game introduces an emotional story, but never follows through with it. The same goes for Dani, the main character. In a game about rebellion and fighting for freedom, you'd expect some kind of personal connection between the hero and the villain. But that doesn't happen. Dani and Castillo barely interact. There's no face-to-face confrontation, no meaningful conversations, no shared history. It's like they live in two different stories. That means there's no tension, no deep rivalry, and no emotional payoff when the game ends. You never get the feeling that Dani truly understands or hates Castillo. He's just the final boss in a long line of enemies. Even the side characters, like Clara, Juan, and the different rebel leaders, don't really grow or change. You help them out, do some missions, and then move on. You don't get many moments of bonding, heartbreak, or real conflict. As a result, the story doesn't leave a strong emotional impact. When something big happens, you don't feel shocked or sad because you were never really attached to the characters. The emotional core of the story is missing. The game had so many chances to make you care. Diego's inner struggle, Dani's rebellion, the people suffering under Castillo. But instead of focusing on those human moments, Far Cry 6 spends too much time on explosions, missions, and jokes. It doesn't stop to let the serious parts sink in. That's the biggest problem. It looks like a game that wants to say something deep, but it doesn't let you feel it. And that makes everything, including Castillo's downfall, feel empty. When you first start playing Far Cry 6, Yara feels huge and exciting. The map is big, the environment is beautiful, and there are so many things to do. You see jungles, towns, beaches, mountains, military zones, and lots of small villages. It feels like you're stepping into a real country with a lot of history and culture. But once you start playing for a few hours, something becomes clear. Most of it is just for show. The world looks alive, but it doesn't feel like it matters. You do the same kind of missions over and over again. Take over this base, destroy that anti-aircraft cannon, hijack a truck, repeat. Everything is placed differently on the map, but the actual tasks feel almost the same. The enemies behave the same way, the buildings look similar, and after a while, you know exactly what's going to happen before it even starts. The sad part is, Yara has the potential to be something really special. It's inspired by Cuba, with a mix of old cars, Spanish-style towns, and a people struggling under a dictatorship. But the game doesn't bring that world to life. You don't get to talk to many everyday people. The towns are filled with nameless NPCs who say the same lines. Nobody reacts to your presence in a meaningful way. If you walk into a town after blowing up 5 enemy bases, people still act normal, like nothing has changed. There's no celebration, no resistance movement growing around you, no sense that your actions are making a difference. It feels like the world doesn't even notice you. Also, Yara is packed with icons on the map. Checkpoints, treasure hunts, races, side missions, fishing spots, but most of it is just filler. Many of these activities feel like they're only there to give you something to do, not because they actually matter to the story or to the world. You'll find hidden caches or do side quests for random characters, but they rarely affect anything beyond giving you a gun or some gear. It's busy work. It keeps you occupied, but it doesn't give you a reason to care. That's a big problem in an open world game. You should want to explore because you're curious, not just because the map has a question mark. Even the animals in nature, which look amazing, don't really add depth. You can hunt, but it's not meaningful. You can fish, but it feels like a side minigame with no purpose. These things are fun at first, but the game never gives you a reason to keep doing them. And unlike older Far Cry games, there's not much survival feeling either. You don't need to craft health items from plants anymore. You heal automatically, and ammo is everywhere. So, even though you're in the middle of a war-torn island, you never feel the pressure of survival. In the end, Yara is a beautiful shell. It's a world that looks amazing in screenshots but doesn't feel alive when you're actually playing. The people don't change, the cities don't evolve, the enemies don't get smarter. Whether you've been playing for 2 hours or 20, the experience stays the same. And that's why the open world feels empty. Not because it lacks size, but because it lacks meaning. At first, playing Far Cry 6 feels fun. You get cool weapons, you can sneak around or go in guns blazing, and you're dropped into a huge world full of missions, enemies, and places to explore. It's exciting to use homemade weapons, ride horses, drive old school cars, and take on enemy bases. The game gives you freedom to choose how you want to play. Do you want to be stealthy or aggressive? Do you want to use a sniper rifle or go loud with explosives? That choice is great at the beginning, but the problem is, after a few hours, the excitement starts to wear off. Why? Because the game doesn't change. You keep doing the same kind of missions, fighting the same kind of enemies, and using the same tactics. The enemies don't get smarter. The missions don't get more creative. It's like the game is stuck on repeat. Once you learn how to take over one checkpoint or base, you've basically learned how to do all of them. There's no big twist, no surprise, no mission that really forces you to rethink your strategy. The game gives you a lot of gear. Guns, mods, backpacks called Supremos that have special powers like rocket blasts or EMP waves. It sounds cool and it looks cool too. But here's the problem. You don't actually need most of it. You can beat almost every mission with just a few basic weapons. There's no challenge pushing you to experiment or use different tools. For example, if you like using a silenced rifle, you can use that for most of the game and be fine. That makes all the other weapons and gadgets feel useless. Why try something new if the old thing always works? Even the new systems, like upgrading your gear or crafting different types of ammo, feel like they don't matter much. You collect materials, visit workbenches, and make mods. But again, the game doesn't really need you to do this. It's just extra steps for things that don't change the gameplay in a big way. The enemy armor system is supposed to encourage you to match ammo types with enemy types, but most players ignore it because regular bullets get the job done just fine. The game talks about tactical choices, but rarely rewards or demands them. The AI, artificial intelligence of the enemies, is also very weak. Soldiers often run around in circles or stand out in the open during fights. They don't react cleverly when you attack their base. Once you understand their behavior, they become easy to beat. Even on harder difficulties, it doesn't feel like the game is challenging you with smart enemies, it just makes them hit harder. That's not fun or rewarding, it just feels lazy. And then there are the side missions and extra activities. Some are interesting, like treasure hunts that make you solve a small puzzle, but most are basic tasks. Kill a target, pick up an item, rescue someone, or follow a trail. They're not bad, they just don't feel exciting after the 5th or 10th time. There's little story, few surprises, and barely any character development. It all feels like filler, things to keep you busy, but not things that make the game better. Over time, this repetitive gameplay loop becomes tiring. You unlock new weapons, new gear, and new zones, but nothing really changes. The missions stay the same. The enemies stay the same. The world doesn't push back. It feels like you're just going through the motions. And in a game about rebellion and revolution, That lack of challenge or change makes everything feel flat. To sum it up, Far Cry 6 starts strong, but it doesn't grow. It gives you tools and freedom, but doesn't give you good enough reasons to use them in new ways. The gameplay loop, while fun at first, becomes stale too quickly. And that's a huge problem for a game that wants to keep you playing for dozens of hours. One of the biggest disappointments in Far Cry 6 is how it uses, or rather wastes, its main villain, Antón Castillo. When the game was first revealed, fans were excited. Why? Because Antón Castillo is played by Giancarlo Esposito, a brilliant actor known for playing cold, smart, dangerous villains, like Gus Fring in Breaking Bad. People expected a deep, terrifying villain who would leave a lasting impact on the story and the player. But that never really happens. Even though Anton is talked about a lot in the game, he barely shows up. And when he does, the scenes are short and don't really develop his character much. He feels like a background figure instead of the driving force of the story. In earlier Far Cry games, the villains were one of the biggest highlights. Voss from Far Cry 3 was unpredictable and scary, and even though he wasn't in every scene, he had a strong presence. You felt him. You were always a little nervous because you never knew when he might appear or what he might do. Pagan Min in Far Cry 4 and Joseph Seed in Far Cry 5 also had strong personalities and shaped the world around them. Their beliefs, their madness, their voices, those things made the story feel alive. But Antón Castillo? He's calm, he's strict, and he talks a lot about order and control, but he never feels dangerous. He never really pushes the player. He talks a big game, but the game doesn't show how bad he truly is. The game tells you that Anton is a cruel dictator. It says he uses child labor, kills his enemies, and forces people to work on tobacco farms. But you rarely see these things happen in front of you. Instead, you hear about them through cutscenes or side dialogue. That's not enough. In a game like this, you should experience the villain's cruelty yourself. You should see the consequences of his rule directly through gameplay, not just hear about it secondhand. Without that, it's hard to truly hate him or fear him. He becomes just another generic bad guy with a few speeches. And then there's his son, Diego. The story wants to focus on the relationship between Anton and Diego, the father trying to shape his son into a future leader. This idea could have been very powerful. It could have shown us how Diego struggles between right and wrong, between love and fear, between following his father or becoming his own person. But again, the game never really goes deep into this. Diego is mostly quiet, and the father-son scenes feel too short and rushed. By the time anything major happens with them, the game is nearly over, so that whole story thread feels wasted. Worse, Anton and Diego don't really interact with you, the player, much at all. In a good villain story, the enemy and the hero should have a personal connection. There should be moments where they talk, where they challenge each other, where they make you feel something. Maybe anger, maybe fear, maybe doubt. But in Far Cry 6, you barely talk to Anton. There's no emotional connection, no real tension. You're just told he's the bad guy, go stop him. And that's not good storytelling. That's lazy. By the end of the game, when the big final moment comes and the story wraps up, it doesn't feel earned. The showdown between Dani and Anton feels cold and empty. There's no real weight to it, no powerful final conversation, no moral struggle, no big reveal. Just another cutscene with some dialogue and a fade to black. You don't feel satisfied. You don't feel like you've defeated a monster or changed the world. You just feel done. And that's the biggest failure. A villain like Antón Castillo, played by an actor as good as Giancarlo Esposito, should have been legendary. He should have been one of the best villains in gaming. But instead, he's underused, underwritten, and ultimately forgettable. The game had gold in its hands and somehow turned it into dust. When you first look at the map in Far Cry 6, Yara looks amazing. It's a huge island filled with forests, beaches, towns, mountains, farms, and military bases. It feels like there's a lot to explore and discover. But after you spend some time playing, you start to realize something. There's not much going on. Yes, the map is big, but it's also empty. Most of the places feel the same, and a lot of the activities feel boring or pointless. You'll see things like enemy checkpoints, supply drops, hidden treasures, and hunting spots. But once you've done a few of each, They all start to feel like copy-paste jobs. Every checkpoint is just a group of soldiers around a flag. You beat them, raise your own flag, and move on. It never changes or evolves. The supply drops are just timed races. Hunting animals only gives you crafting materials, and crafting isn't even that important. Treasure hunts are small puzzle missions, but most of them aren't that exciting either. The biggest problem is that the world doesn't react to what you do. If you take over a base, the people don't cheer. If you beat a major mission, the world doesn't change. Civilians still act the same, soldiers still show up in random places. It feels like you're doing all this hard work for nothing. You don't see any real progress in the world around you. That makes the entire open world feel lifeless. Even though the map looks different in some places, like swamps, cities, or mountains, it still plays the same everywhere. The missions are built using the same formula. Go to a place, kill some enemies, maybe blow something up, and leave. The setting doesn't really change how things play out. It's just a new background. And while the game tries to make Yara feel like a real country, it never really succeeds. There's no real culture in the world. The people you meet don't have deep stories. You don't find interesting places with history. It feels like an open world made to look nice in screenshots, but it doesn't feel alive. So yes, the world is big, but big doesn't mean good. What players really want is a world that feels real, where their actions matter, and where surprises can happen. In Far Cry 6, you get a lot of map, but not a lot of meaning. Let me know when you're ready for Section 3 of Part 4, simplified like this: repetitive gameplay that gets boring. When you first start Far Cry 6, the gameplay feels exciting. You get a bunch of cool weapons, a massive open world to explore, vehicles to drive, enemies to fight, and bases to take over. At first, it feels like you have a lot of options. You think, this is going to be fun for hours. But after playing for a while, you start to notice something. You're doing the same things over and over again. The game becomes repetitive fast, and that fun feeling starts to fade. Most missions follow the same formula. Go to a place, kill all the enemies, blow something up, and leave. That's it. Whether it's a military base, a checkpoint, or a side mission, the objective barely changes. There are no smart puzzles, no surprising twists, no dramatic choices. You just run in, shoot your way through, and check the box. And when that's the main loop of the game, it gets boring. Even the enemies don't offer much variety. You fight the same types of soldiers over and over, some with helmets, some with flamethrowers, some with shields, but they all act the same. They don't use smart tactics. They just run toward you or hide behind cover. After a while, you stop thinking during fights. You just blast through everything because there's no challenge or surprise. The game gives you powerful resolver weapons, like a CD launcher, a nail gun, or even a backpack that shoots rockets. These sound fun, but they make the game too easy. Instead of planning your attack, you just press a button and destroy everything. It removes the tension. You're supposed to be a guerrilla fighter using clever tactics, but instead, you feel like an overpowered superhero. Even the side content, like hunting, races, and treasure hunts, gets old fast. Hunting is just shooting animals for crafting materials. Races don't matter for the story. Treasure hunts are small challenges that repeat the same ideas. Climb here, swim there, press a button. There's no story or emotion behind them. They just feel like filler content. And because you level up fast and unlock stronger gear early, the rest of the game feels unbalanced. You don't need to think about strategy. You don't need to change your approach. You can just keep using the same weapons and win every fight. That makes the gameplay feel flat and too easy, especially for long play sessions. In the end, Far Cry 6 gives you a huge toolbox, but barely any reason to use it in creative ways. You don't need to think. You don't need to adapt. The game stops challenging you. And when a game stops challenging you, it stops being fun. Far Cry 6 tries to tell a serious political story. It's about a dictator named Antón Castillo who rules the island of Yara with fear and control. People are being oppressed. There's corruption, violence, and a growing revolution. At first, it seems like the game wants to say something deep about power, freedom, and resistance. But sadly, it doesn't. The political story, which could have been powerful and emotional, is wasted. One big problem is that the game doesn't take a clear stand. It shows you a brutal dictatorship, people being arrested, killed, and forced to work. But it never really explores what that means. You see bad things happening, but the game doesn't ask any serious questions about them. It doesn't make you feel the pain of the people. It doesn't show you how life truly is under a cruel ruler. It just uses the dictatorship as a background for action. Antón Castillo, played by the amazing Giancarlo Esposito, is introduced as a smart and dangerous villain, but the game barely uses him. He appears in cutscenes now and then, usually on a TV screen or during story breaks, but you don't spend much time with him. He doesn't interact with the player in interesting ways. He feels more like a movie trailer than a real character in the game. That's a huge waste of a talented actor and a powerful villain concept. The same problem happens with the revolution. The rebels are supposed to be fighting for freedom, but their stories are shallow. You don't get to know their lives or beliefs deeply. Their missions often feel silly or random, like helping with a rap song, cockfighting, or blowing up statues. These things could be fun side content, but they don't match the serious theme of a political uprising. The story talks about war and suffering, but the gameplay feels like a joke. Even the ending of the game doesn't hit hard. After everything you do, fighting, killing, surviving, the final moments feel rushed. You don't get to see what happens to Yara after the revolution. You don't feel the true cost of war. There's no emotional closure. The story just ends, like a movie that cut out its last scene. And maybe the biggest problem, the game tries to look political, but it avoids taking real risks. It never talks about real-world problems or gives strong opinions. It plays it safe. It wants to look deep without actually being deep. That's why the story doesn't stay with you after the game ends. Far Cry 6 had the chance to tell a powerful story about dictatorship, revolution, and what it means to fight for freedom. But instead of diving deep, it stayed on the surface. It wasted its best ideas. And that's why, even though the game looks serious, it feels empty where it matters most: your heart. One of the fun features in Far Cry 6 is the animal companion system. These are called amigos, and they fight alongside you. At first, it feels great. You can unlock cool animals like Guapo the crocodile, Chorizo the little dog in a wheelchair, Boom Boom the dog from Far Cry 5, and even a wild rooster named Chicharron. Each animal looks different and has a special ability. For example, Chorizo can distract enemies, and Guapo can heal himself during fights. In the beginning, this feels exciting and fresh. The animals are cute or cool, and it feels like they add something special to your gameplay. But after a while, you realize something. These animals don't really change how you play. Once you pick your favorite one, you don't need to switch to the others. You can keep using the same animal again and again, and you'll still win. It becomes a routine. There's not much thinking or planning needed. Also, these animals don't really connect to the story. They don't talk or change anything in the missions. They just follow you around and do one or two helpful things. There's no deep bond, no growth, and no real emotional connection. You don't feel like you're working together as a team. You just call them in and watch them do the same trick over and over. So yes, the amigos are fun at first. Chorizo is cute, Guapo is strong, and Chicharron is crazy. But after a few hours, it all starts to feel the same. The system is fun to look at, but there's not much underneath. It's another example of how Far Cry 6 gives you something that looks exciting, but doesn't give you a reason to care for long. In Far Cry 6, there are a lot of guns. You can find pistols, rifles, machine guns, rocket launchers, sniper rifles, and even special homemade weapons called resolver weapons. At first, it feels like the game is giving you a huge collection of cool tools. You think, wow, I'll be able to fight in so many different ways. But after playing for a while, you realize there's a problem. You don't really need all these weapons. The game gives you too much, but doesn't give you a reason to use most of it. Many of the regular guns feel the same. You can upgrade them with mods or special ammo, but even that doesn't make a huge difference. Once you find one or two weapons you like, you just keep using them. There's no real challenge that forces you to switch things up. Most enemies go down easily, especially when you use overpowered weapons like rocket backpacks or silent sniper rifles. The resolver weapons are supposed to be wild and creative. You get a CD launcher, a flamethrower, a silent nail gun, and other weird gadgets. But again, they don't feel balanced. Some are super strong, while others are just fun to look at but not very useful. Instead of using different weapons to solve different problems, you just pick the strongest one and use it again and again. Also, you don't need to worry about buying ammo or crafting much. The game throws resources and weapons at you all the time. You'll always have what you need. That sounds helpful, but it also removes any sense of survival or planning. In a game about guerrilla warfare where you're supposed to be the underdog, it's strange how easy everything is. In the end, the weapon system is another example of a missed opportunity. There's lots of variety, but not much depth. You don't need to think about what to use or how to approach a fight. You just blast your way through every mission with the same few weapons. It becomes boring, fast. The game gives you a giant toolbox, but never gives you a reason to open most of it. One of the most important parts of any action game is the combat. It should feel exciting, tense, and rewarding. At first, the shooting in Far Cry 6 feels okay. The guns sound good, the controls are smooth, and explosions look cool. But the more you play, the more you notice that the enemy AI, artificial intelligence, is very weak. Enemies don't act smart. They don't use strategy. They don't even try to surprise you. This makes the combat feel boring and easy after a while. Enemies usually just stand in the open and shoot at you. Sometimes they hide behind cover, but they don't move much or try to outsmart you. If you throw a grenade or start firing, they often just run toward you or away from you without thinking. It becomes very easy to defeat them. You don't need to use stealth, tactics, or different weapons. You just shoot, reload, and repeat. The game gives you strong tools too early. You get powerful weapons and the Supremo backpack, which can fire rockets or EMP blasts. These make you feel overpowered. It sounds fun, but if you always win easily, where's the challenge? If the enemies can't fight back in smart ways, the combat becomes predictable. You know you'll win, so there's no real excitement. Boss fights are also weak. Instead of fighting strong or unique enemies, you mostly fight waves of regular soldiers. Even the final boss isn't a big challenge. There's no big difference in how the fight works. It's just another shootout. Compare this to other games where bosses have special moves or force you to change your playstyle. Far Cry 6 doesn't have that. What's missing is tension. You never feel like you're in real danger. Guerrilla warfare is supposed to be tough. You're supposed to feel outnumbered. But in Far Cry 6, you always feel like a superhero with a gun. That might sound fun at first, but it gets boring fast because the game doesn't push you to think, adapt, or improve. In the end, the weak AI makes every mission feel the same. Whether you're sneaking into a base or defending a camp, the enemies don't change much. The challenge doesn't increase. That's why, after a few hours, the combat feels more like a chore than an adventure. It's not that the shooting is broken, it's just that the enemies never make it interesting. When you first look at the map in Far Cry 6, it's massive. Yara is a huge island with jungles, cities, mountains, farms, rivers, and coastlines. It looks beautiful and full of life. You might think, wow, there's so much to explore. But after you start playing, the truth becomes clear. Even though the map is big, it feels empty and repetitive. It doesn't feel like a living, breathing world. The game fills the map with tons of icons, military checkpoints, treasure hunts, races, supply drops, hunting grounds, and more. But most of these activities feel the same after a while. You go to a place, shoot some enemies, press a button, or collect an item. That's it. The locations might look different, but the tasks are almost always the same. It turns into a checklist, not an adventure. Another problem is that the world doesn't react to what you do. You can take over a base, defeat soldiers, or finish a big mission. But the people around you act like nothing happened. Civilians don't celebrate, towns don't change, the military doesn't send extra forces or set traps. There's no feeling that you're making a real impact. It's like the world is just a background instead of a living system. Also, you can fast travel almost anywhere from the start. That makes exploring feel pointless. You don't need to drive or walk across the map unless you really want to. And when you do, you'll notice that the environment repeats itself a lot. You see the same buildings, the same roads, and the same kinds of enemies. There's not much to surprise you. Even animals and random events feel basic. You might see a wild animal or a car chase, but they happen in the same way every time. There's no true randomness or creativity. Compared to games like Red Dead Redemption 2, which feel alive and unpredictable, Far Cry 6 feels like it's just pretending to be alive. So, yes, Yara is big, but big doesn't always mean better. The world looks nice on the outside, but it's missing the small details and surprises that make exploration feel rewarding. One of the most important parts of any action game is the combat. It should feel exciting, tense, and rewarding. At first, the shooting in Far Cry 6 feels okay. The guns sound good, the controls are smooth, and explosions look cool. But the more you play, the more you notice that the enemy AI, artificial intelligence, is very weak. Enemies don't act smart. They don't use strategy. They don't even try to surprise you. This makes the combat feel boring and easy after a while. Enemies usually just stand in the open and shoot at you. Sometimes they hide behind cover, but they don't move much or try to outsmart you. If you throw a grenade or start firing, they often just run toward you or away from you without thinking. It becomes very easy to defeat them. You don't need to use stealth, tactics, or different weapons. You just shoot, reload, and repeat. The game gives you strong tools too early. You get powerful weapons and the Supremo backpack, which can fire rockets or EMP blasts. These make you feel overpowered. It sounds fun, but if you always win easily, where's the challenge? If the enemies can't fight back in smart ways, the combat becomes predictable. You know you'll win, so there's no real excitement. Boss fights are also weak. Instead of fighting strong or unique enemies, you mostly fight waves of regular soldiers. Even the final boss isn't a big challenge. There's no big difference in how the fight works. It's just another shootout. Compare this to other games where bosses have special moves or force you to change your playstyle. Far Cry 6 doesn't have that. What's missing is tension. You never feel like you're in real danger. Guerrilla warfare is supposed to be tough. You're supposed to feel outnumbered. But in Far Cry 6, you always feel like a superhero with a gun. That might sound fun at first, but it gets boring fast because the game doesn't push you to think, adapt, or improve. In the end, the weak AI makes every mission feel the same. Whether you're sneaking into a base or defending a camp, the enemies don't change much. The challenge doesn't increase. That's why, after a few hours, the combat feels more like a chore than an adventure. It's not that the shooting is broken, it's just that the enemies never make it interesting. One of the most hyped parts of Far Cry 6 was the villain, Antón Castillo, played by the brilliant Giancarlo Esposito. When the trailers dropped, people were excited. He looked intense, controlled, and dangerous. Just the kind of villain Far Cry games are known for. Ubisoft has a strong history with bad guys. Vaas from Far Cry 3, Pagan Min from Far Cry 4, and even Joseph Seed from Far Cry 5. They all left a mark. But Antón Castillo? He ends up being one of the underused and wasted characters in the entire game. The problem starts with how little time you actually spend with him. For a character who's supposed to be the face of the entire dictatorship, he barely appears during the game. You don't see him much outside of cutscenes, and there's almost no direct interaction between him and Dani, the protagonist. He stays locked away in his palace while you're out in the world doing missions. This makes him feel distant and disconnected. He's not an ever-present threat like Vaas was. He doesn't pop up to taunt you or interfere with your progress. He's more of a background character than a true force in your journey. And when he does appear, his scenes are usually one-sided. He gives speeches, scolds his son, or makes cold-hearted decisions. But we already expect that from a dictator. The game never gives him depth beyond the basic, "I'm doing this for my country" justification. He's supposed to be complex, but he feels flat. There's no moment where the game challenges us to understand his perspective in a meaningful way. We never see him vulnerable, or doubting himself, or showing a different side. That's a huge missed opportunity. Even his relationship with his son, Diego, which could have added real emotional weight to the story, feels underdeveloped. The game wants to show a father grooming his son to become a dictator, but that storyline never really builds up or explodes in a powerful way. It just unfolds quietly without tension. Diego's character doesn't grow much, and Anton's influence on him feels more symbolic than emotional. By the end of the game, when the story tries to go for a shocking moment involving them, it feels hollow, because the game never made us care about their relationship in the first place. Worse still, Anton never directly challenges Dani. He doesn't try to manipulate them, threaten them personally, or create any real rivalry. Think about how powerful it would have been if the villain tried to break Dani psychologically, if he offered them a chance to join, or if he made Dani question the rebellion. But none of that happens. Dani and Anton might as well be strangers, even though one is the face of the revolution and the other is the dictator they're trying to destroy. This lack of connection makes Antón Castillo feel like a missed chance. Giancarlo Esposito gives a great performance with what he's given, but the writing doesn't support it. He's stuck in a box, literally and creatively, and never gets to become the terrifying, iconic villain he could have been. In the end, Antón Castillo becomes just another piece of set dressing, an idea of a villain, not a fully formed character. And for a game that puts so much weight on fighting him, that's a huge problem. The story needed a powerful enemy that we feared, hated, and maybe even understood. But what we got was a cardboard cutout of a dictator who stays in his palace and talks on the radio. Let's talk about the main character of Far Cry 6, Dani Rojas. On the surface, Dani seems like a big improvement compared to past Far Cry protagonists. For once, we actually get a voiced character with their own personality, not just a silent avatar. Whether you choose male or female Dani, they speak, react to situations, and seem to have some backstory. This feels like a step forward. But the deeper you go into the game, the more you realize that Dani still doesn't feel like a fully fleshed out character. They exist mainly to move the plot forward, not to shape it in any meaningful way. At the beginning of the game, Dani is introduced as a reluctant hero. They don't want to fight. They just want to escape Yara and live a peaceful life somewhere else. That's a great starting point for a character arc. Someone who slowly transforms into a freedom fighter. But the game never fully commits to showing that growth. One minute, Dani is trying to get out of the country, and the next, they're blowing up tanks and leading rebel attacks like they've been doing it for years. There's no slow change, no emotional turning point. It just happens because the story says it should. Even though Dani talks and reacts to events, their personality feels kind of neutral. They're sarcastic sometimes, serious other times, but we don't get to understand their deeper beliefs, fears, or motivations. Why do they care so much about Yara all of a sudden? What do they personally stand for? The game doesn't explore these questions. As a result, Dani ends up feeling like a generic action hero with a few catchphrases, more like a vessel for the player than a person with their own inner world. And while Dani is technically part of many important events in the story, they don't feel like a true leader. Most of the time, they're just taking orders from other rebel characters. Clara tells you what to do, Juan gives you weapons, and each region's leader gives you missions. You're the main character, but it often feels like you're just running errands for everyone else. There's no moment where you make a big decision that changes the course of the revolution. Dani is present, but not powerful. The game also misses chances to make Dani more emotionally involved. They see friends die, betrayals happen, and innocent people suffer. But the game rarely shows how these events affect Dani on a personal level. There's very little reflection or emotional response. It's all just go, go, go. This makes it hard for the player to really connect with Dani or feel like they're growing through the story. In short, Dani Rojas had potential to be a strong, memorable main character, but the game never takes the time to really develop them. They speak, but they don't say much that matters. They fight, but we don't know what's truly driving them. And in a game about revolution and sacrifice, that lack of emotional depth really hurts the experience. One of the biggest problems in Far Cry 6 is how the story and the gameplay don't feel connected. You're told you're part of a desperate revolution, fighting against a brutal dictator who controls everything. People are dying, there's fear in the streets, and you're supposed to feel like a small rebel trying to fight back against a giant military machine. But the moment you start playing, that whole idea kind of falls apart. Because the gameplay makes you feel like a superhero, not a rebel. From the very beginning, you're given powerful weapons, vehicles, and gadgets. Within just a few hours, you're riding tanks, calling in airstrikes, and using high-tech backpacks that shoot rockets or let you dash through enemies like a sci-fi soldier. Instead of sneaking around, scared and underpowered, you're blowing up bases like it's nothing. The military is supposed to be scary, but they're not. You're way more powerful than them, and the game makes it easy to take out entire outposts by yourself. This takes away the tension. If the rebels are so desperate and under-resourced, why do you have more firepower than the entire army? Why is it so easy to move around, take over enemy zones, and survive almost anything? There's no sense of risk. And if there's no danger, then the revolution doesn't feel real. It becomes just another sandbox game where you're running around doing side missions, blowing stuff up, and collecting loot. Another issue is that the world doesn't change in response to your actions. You can liberate an entire province, defeat enemy commanders, and destroy their bases. But the people in the world barely react. The military keeps patrolling the streets like nothing happened. Civilians don't rise up. The environment stays mostly the same. You never feel like you're actually turning the tide of the war. It feels like busy work, not progress. Even the missions often feel disconnected from the larger fight. Many side missions are quirky or random, like finding lost roosters or helping someone record a music video. These might be fun in a silly way, but they break the immersion. How are you supposed to feel the weight of a revolution when your hero is spending time doing odd jobs for strangers? It makes the whole rebellion feel like a background idea, not the core of the game. And finally, the choices you make in the game don't matter. You never really get to lead the revolution in your own way. There are no big moral decisions, no branching paths, and no consequences to how you approach missions. Whether you play loud or quiet, whether you rush the story or take your time, the game unfolds the same way. That makes your role in the revolution feel shallow. You're not shaping the future of Yara. You're just following a script. In the end, Far Cry 6 tries to sell the fantasy of being a freedom fighter, but the gameplay doesn't support that story. You're too strong, too safe, and too disconnected from the struggle the game wants you to believe in. It's a revolution without fear, without change, and without any real sense of danger. And that's what makes the whole experience feel hollow. One of the most disappointing things about Far Cry 6 is its open world. At first glance, Yara looks amazing. It's a massive island inspired by Cuba, filled with tropical beaches, dense jungles, rundown cities, and rural villages. The visuals are beautiful. Sunlight filters through trees, animals roam the countryside, and the ocean sparkles on the horizon. But the problem is that this world, as pretty as it is, feels empty. Not physically empty, but emotionally and mechanically empty. There's not much going on beneath the surface. Let's start with the biggest issue. Yara doesn't feel alive. In a game that's supposed to be about a country in the middle of a brutal civil war, you'd expect to see the world reflect that chaos. But it doesn't. Most towns are strangely quiet. Civilians walk around or stand in one place, not reacting much to what's happening around them. Soldiers patrol here and there, but there's no real tension. You rarely see anything dynamic. No ambushes, no spontaneous uprisings, no random events that make you feel like the revolution is alive. It's like the world is frozen, just waiting for you to trigger the next mission. The NPCs, non-playable characters, are especially lifeless. They repeat the same lines, have the same animations, and show no emotion, even when fighting breaks out nearby. You can be in the middle of a gunfight and see someone just standing there, casually leaning on a wall like nothing's wrong. That completely breaks immersion. It makes the world feel fake, like a movie set instead of a real living country in crisis. Even worse, the world doesn't change based on your actions. If you liberate an area, take over a base, or kill a key military figure, the environment stays the same. Civilians don't suddenly act freer or happier. Soldiers don't retreat. There's no visual or mechanical feedback to show that you're making a difference. It's all static. You're told the revolution is happening, but the world doesn't show it. Then there's the problem of repetitive activities. Yara is packed with things to do: checkpoints, anti-aircraft guns, treasure hunts, bases, hunting missions, and more. But most of these activities feel like busy work. They're copy-pasted across the map, and after a few hours, they start to blur together. It's the same pattern again and again. Go here, kill these enemies, collect this item, move on. There's no sense of discovery or surprise. The world becomes a checklist, not an adventure. Sure, there are some cool moments, maybe a hidden cave, a nice view, or a clever treasure puzzle, but they're rare. Most of the time, the world just feels like a pretty backdrop for the same old gameplay loops. Compare this to open worlds like Red Dead Redemption 2 or The Witcher 3, where you stumble into random stories or events that make the world feel alive. In Far Cry 6, everything is scheduled and placed. There's no sense of mystery. And finally, the animals and wildlife system doesn't add much either. You can hunt, fish, and tame pets, but it's all shallow. The animals don't act realistically, and the rewards aren't that interesting. It feels like a feature added just to say it's there, not because it adds meaning or depth to the world. In the end, Yara is a gorgeous place to look at, but not a fun or meaningful place to explore. It's like a museum. Nice to walk through, but nothing really reacts to you. And for a game that's supposed to be about chaos, rebellion, and changing the world around you, that lifelessness is a huge problem. Side missions in open world games are supposed to add depth. They should tell small stories that connect to the world, flesh out characters, or at least offer fun gameplay. But in Far Cry 6, most side missions feel disconnected from the main story and the idea of a revolution. Instead of helping you understand the people of Yara or the fight against Castillo, you often end up doing odd, silly, or meaningless tasks that don't fit the serious tone of the world. Let's take an example. You're told that the country is on fire, people are being killed, families are being torn apart, the military is everywhere. So what's your next side quest? Catching runaway roosters, recovering a stolen crocodile, or helping a washed-up musician record a radio song? These might sound quirky and fun on paper, but they feel completely out of place when the story is trying to make you care about war and freedom. It's not that humor or weird side missions are always bad. Far Cry has always had a little craziness in it. But here, the tone doesn't match. The revolution is supposed to be the heart of the game, but the side content often acts like it doesn't exist. There's barely any emotional weight. You rarely meet side characters who are suffering under Castillo's rule. You don't hear stories of oppression, fear, or loss from everyday people. Instead, you meet cartoonish characters who act like they're in a comedy show, not a war zone. The worst part is that many of these missions don't reward you with meaningful outcomes. You don't build alliances or gain serious strategic advantages. Most of the time, you get a new weapon, a charm, or some crafting materials. These feel like small rewards for small, forgettable missions. There's no big payoff, no moment that sticks with you or makes you feel like you've made a real difference. Compare that to games where side quests build the world. In The Witcher 3, a small quest can show you the pain of a broken village. In Red Dead Redemption 2, side characters feel like real people with their own lives and struggles. But in Far Cry 6, most side characters are just there to give you a task, crack a joke, and disappear. It also doesn't help that many of these missions follow the same structure. Go here, shoot enemies, pick up item, return. There's not much variety in how missions play out. After a few hours, it starts to feel like a loop. Drive here, fight, loot, leave. That loop isn't bad by itself, but when the story is about something as serious as revolution, it feels like a missed opportunity. In short, the side content in Far Cry 6 doesn't support its main theme. It forgets the revolution, and instead leans into random humor and filler content. Instead of helping you understand the people of Yara or deepening your connection to the world, it mostly gives you distractions. And while distractions can be fun, in a game about fighting for freedom, they just feel hollow. One of the most important parts of a shooter game is the enemy AI, how smart and challenging your enemies are. But in Far Cry 6, the enemy AI is very weak. Most enemies don't think, don't work together, and don't make you change your strategy. They just rush at you or stand out in the open, making the combat feel easy, predictable, and boring after a while. At first, the shooting feels good. The guns have weight, there's a lot of variety, and everything sounds powerful. But once you notice how dumb the enemies are, the excitement fades. You can walk into a military base, throw a grenade, and most enemies will just stand there or run toward the explosion. Others will hide behind cover for a second, then randomly walk out into gunfire. It feels like fighting cardboard cutouts instead of trained soldiers. This poor AI also makes stealth less rewarding. You can take out enemies one by one, and the others barely notice. If they do see a dead body, they might walk over, but they usually don't raise an alarm quickly or call for backup effectively. Sometimes they'll even go back to their routine like nothing happened. It breaks the realism and makes sneaky play feel pointless, because brute force is often faster and just as effective. What makes things worse is how repetitive the combat becomes. The game throws the same types of enemies at you over and over again: standard soldiers, flamethrowers, snipers, and the occasional tank. There's very little variety. Once you figure out a good weapon combo, like a powerful rifle and a Supremo, your special backpack, you can use it in every fight with the same results. There's no reason to change tactics, and that kills the challenge. Even the outpost takeovers, which were a highlight in older Far Cry games, feel boring here. They're too easy. You walk in, shoot a few enemies, and take control. There's no real strategy needed, and the game doesn't punish you for making mistakes. In past games, these missions felt like puzzles. In Far Cry 6, they feel like chores. You can also hire animal companions, like a crocodile or a little dog in a wheelchair. These amigos are fun to use at first, but again, the weak AI means they're rarely needed. They don't really help with strategy. They're just cute sidekicks who distract enemies or bite them while you do all the real work. All of this leads to combat that feels shallow. You don't need to plan, adapt, or think. You just walk in, shoot, and leave. That might be fun for a few hours, but over a long game, it gets tiring. A revolution should feel like a struggle, but in Far Cry 6, every battle feels like you're just going through the motions. In the end, the lack of smart enemies and creative combat design takes away from the game's excitement. It's not that the shooting is broken, it's just that it's too easy, too repetitive, and too safe. And for a game about risking everything to take down a dictator, that's a big problem. A big problem in Far Cry 6 is that it talks a lot about fighting for freedom, but it doesn't really show the consequences of that fight. The story says you're helping a revolution. You're told that you're changing lives, defeating an evil government, and leading people to freedom. But the game world doesn't reflect that at all. Whether you win or lose a battle, the world stays mostly the same. That makes your actions feel meaningless. Let's look at what happens after you capture a military base. In many games, doing something like this would change the local area. Maybe civilians would start walking around freely. Maybe enemy patrols would disappear, or maybe new resistance forces would show up. But in Far Cry 6, almost nothing changes. You take over the base, and then it just becomes a fast travel point. That's it. The surrounding world looks the same, and people act the same. There's no feeling of progress, no visible impact. This also applies to story choices, or rather, the lack of them. The game is very linear. You do missions, follow orders, and the story moves forward in a straight line. You don't get to make big decisions. You can't choose to lead differently, to spare or kill someone important, or to shape the future of Yara in any real way. No matter what you do, the story plays out in the same way. That removes a lot of the emotional weight from your actions. The revolution also doesn't challenge you morally. In a real civil war, there are hard choices. Who do you trust? How far should you go? Are you becoming just as bad as the people you're fighting? The game rarely asks these questions. Most of the time, it treats you like a superhero, killing enemies, blowing up tanks, and saving the day, without ever stopping to ask, is this really helping? That makes the story feel shallow and one-sided. The ending is another example of this problem. After everything you do, after hours of fighting, planning, and leading the rebellion, the ending feels rushed. It wraps up quickly, and it doesn't reflect your personal journey. You don't get a moment to see the full consequences of your actions. You don't see what kind of future you created. And that's disappointing, especially after a long game that claims to be about serious change. Also, the game doesn't punish failure or mistakes. If you mess up a mission, you can usually just retry with no real consequence. If you kill civilians by accident, nothing happens. There's no sense of loss or risk. That makes the revolution feel more like a video game challenge than a real fight for freedom. In short, Far Cry 6 talks a lot about revolution, but it doesn't show it well. Your actions don't change the world, the story doesn't give you real choices, and the game avoids asking hard questions. That makes the whole experience feel flat and shallow. You're told you're part of something big, but it never really feels that way. Far Cry 6 tries to be many things at once: a serious story about revolution, a wild playground full of chaos, a stealth shooter, an action packed war zone, and a funny open world adventure. But the problem is, it never fully commits to any one of those identities. It jumps from serious to silly, from emotional to mindless, without balance or purpose. Because of this, the game suffers from an identity crisis. It doesn't know what it wants to be. Let's start with the tone. One minute you're watching people get executed, seeing the pain of a nation under dictatorship, and feeling like you're in the middle of a war-torn country. The next minute, you're using a backpack that shoots fireworks, driving a car with mounted cannons while a crocodile in a bandana helps you kill soldiers. The game doesn't know if it wants to be Call of Duty or Just Cause, and the clash of tones becomes jarring over time. This inconsistency is everywhere. The story wants you to take Dani's journey seriously. It wants you to care about the rebels, about Castillo's control, about the suffering of the people. But then it throws in a silly side mission where you go hunt wild animals with explosives or help a strange man steal musical equipment. These parts might be entertaining in a vacuum, but when placed next to scenes of torture and political violence, they break immersion and make the emotional moments feel fake. Even the gameplay reflects this confusion. You get powerful guerrilla gear, stealth tools, and high-tech rifles, suggesting the game wants you to be smart and tactical. But then it also gives you wild, over-the-top Supremos that blow up tanks in seconds, and weapons that feel more like toys than tools of rebellion. There's no consistent design philosophy. The game isn't grounded enough to feel realistic, and it's not crazy enough to feel like a true sandbox of mayhem. It sits awkwardly in the middle. This also affects the world building. Yara looks amazing. Beautiful landscapes, realistic cities, dense jungles, but nothing in the world feels alive or responsive. The people don't react to what's happening. Enemy soldiers keep patrolling like robots. Civilians wander aimlessly, never really changing based on the story. You're told the nation is rising up, but it doesn't feel like it. There's no energy, no passion, no sense that a revolution is actually happening. The world looks great, but it lacks soul. Because of this identity crisis, Far Cry 6 ends up feeling forgettable. It has all the pieces to be great: a strong setting, decent characters, fun weapons, and a meaningful theme. But the pieces don't fit together. It wants to be deep, but won't commit to serious storytelling. It wants to be wild, but won't go all the way with creative chaos. So it stays in the middle, safe, confused, and unmemorable. In the end, Far Cry 6 is a game that doesn't know what it's trying to say. And when a game doesn't have a clear identity, it's hard for players to connect with it. You play it, enjoy some parts, get bored with others, and then move on. It doesn't leave a strong mark, not because it's broken, but because it doesn't stand for anything. And that's the real tragedy of Far Cry 6. Yara is the heart of Far Cry 6. It's the setting, the battlefield, and the soul of the revolution. From the moment you land on the island, it's clear that this world has been crafted with a lot of attention to detail. The beaches, jungles, mountains, and towns are all visually stunning. The music, accents, radio broadcasts, and Spanish phrases give the game a cultural flavor that makes it stand out. But for all this effort, the game fails to truly use Yara in meaningful ways. It looks alive, but it doesn't feel alive. Let's start with the people. Yara is supposed to be a country suffering under dictatorship, but the citizens don't react to what's going on. They walk around, say a few lines, and disappear. They don't fight back, don't resist, don't celebrate your victories. Even when you take down major government strongholds, people just carry on like nothing happened. It makes your efforts feel empty, like the world isn't listening or changing with you. That disconnect makes the revolution feel fake. In older Far Cry games, the environment and people reacted more clearly. Taking down an outpost would change enemy presence in the area. Rebels would move in. Patrols would lessen. It felt like progress. But in Far Cry 6, Yara stays the same no matter what you do. Enemy checkpoints reset. Patrols keep spawning. Villagers don't seem to care. And that's frustrating because the game tells you that you're inspiring a movement, but you never see that movement grow. Yara is also split into different regions, each with their own rebel leaders and personalities. This sounds great in theory, but in practice, they don't feel very different. Each region has similar missions: blow up tanks, then sabotage supplies, rescue prisoners. After a while, it all blends together. The regions have great visuals, but their stories and missions don't stand out. They feel like different flavors of the same dish. There are moments of brilliance, though. Some side characters, like the punk rebel Bembe or the fiery Talia, bring life to the world. Some side quests, like rescuing protest singers or smuggling people to safety, feel personal and powerful. But they're rare. Most missions are generic, and Yara's amazing potential is buried under repeated objectives and underdeveloped storytelling. The island itself is massive, but it doesn't reward exploration much. You'll often find the same loot in different places. There are hidden treasures and military caches, but after a few hours, the excitement wears off. There's no deep reason to explore except to check a box. Compared to games like The Witcher 3 or Red Dead Redemption 2, which fill every corner of the map with meaning, Far Cry 6 feels empty by comparison. What makes this a missed opportunity is that Yara could have been one of the most memorable settings in gaming. It has all the ingredients: strong history, beautiful visuals, diverse environments, and cultural richness. But the game uses it more as a backdrop than as a living, breathing world. It's like having a beautiful painting that no one ever looks at closely. In the end, Yara deserved more. It should have been part of the story, not just the place where the story happens. If Yara had reacted to your choices, if its people had risen up with you, if your victories changed the world around you, the game would have felt powerful. But instead, Yara is silent, and that silence weakens everything. Far Cry 6 is trying to say. After spending dozens of hours in Far Cry 6, it's clear that this game had so much potential, but it played it way too safe. Ubisoft had a chance to do something bold: a deep political story, a rich and reactive world, and gameplay that really made you feel like a rebel fighting against a brutal regime. But instead of pushing boundaries, they repeated a familiar formula with a new coat of paint. And while that paint is shiny underneath, it's the same structure we've seen for years. Let's be honest. Far Cry 6 is not a bad game. The gunplay is smooth, the map is massive, the weapons are fun, and there's always something to do. If you just want to turn off your brain and cause chaos in a beautiful open world, it delivers that in big doses. But the problem is, Far Cry 6 wants to be more than just a sandbox shooter. It wants to be taken seriously. It talks about oppression, dictatorship, and revolution, but never digs deep enough to explore those themes in a meaningful way. The biggest issue is the disconnect between what the game says and what it shows. You're told you're a freedom fighter, changing the future of a country, but the world never changes around you. You're told the people are rising up, but they never do. You're told your actions matter, but they don't. The game builds a powerful story setup, but it never follows through. It avoids the hard questions, it dodges moral choices, and it plays it safe when it could have been bold. Antón Castillo, played brilliantly by Giancarlo Esposito, is wasted potential. He's a great villain with a strong presence, but he barely appears. His motivations are shallow, and you never really confront him until the very end. The game never gives you the chance to truly challenge his ideas or face the consequences of your rebellion. It's a one-way story. He's bad, you're good, and that's it. There's no gray area, no depth, no real weight. Dani, your main character, also feels stuck. Whether you play as male or female Dani, you don't get much freedom in how they grow. You can't shape their personality, make meaningful choices, or even decide how the rebellion should unfold. You're just a soldier following orders in a story that pretends you're a leader. That makes your role in the revolution feel hollow. And then there's the gameplay. It's fun, yes, but it's also repetitive. You destroy the same outposts, kill the same enemies, and do the same kinds of missions over and over. Supremos and crazy weapons add spice, but they don't change the core formula. Once the novelty wears off, the loop feels empty. There's no sense of real progress or evolution. You get stronger, but the world stays the same. At the end of the day, Far Cry 6 is the definition of playing it safe. It checks all the boxes of a modern AAA open-world game: huge map, flashy tools, iconic villain, and lots of content. But it lacks soul. It never takes risks. It never asks you to think. It never makes you feel like your actions matter. And that's a shame, because the theme of revolution demands those things. A revolution isn't clean or easy or shallow. It's messy, it's personal, and it should challenge everything. But Far Cry 6 avoids that mess. It puts rebellion in a theme park. If you're looking for fun explosions, cool guns, and a beautiful world to explore, Far Cry 6 gives you all of that. But if you're hoping for a meaningful, emotional, and powerful story about fighting for freedom, you're going to be disappointed. It's a revolution without fire, a cause without consequence, a game with all the tools, but none of the courage to use them fully. And that's why Far Cry 6, despite its scale and polish, ends up being forgettable. Because in the end, it doesn't stand for anything.